Hey there, Holly Show listeners. I hope you are all doing well during this pandemic. If you've been listening to us the last few months, you've heard some great interviews with comic book creators that have come on the show to talk about their Kickstarter campaigns. Last week, I got a DM on Instagram from Michael Pickard, the artist and co-creator of UltraMax, a 96-page supervillains in crime graphic novel, which is now on Kickstarter until October 15th. As the host of a pop culture podcast that loves signal-boosting indie creators, I'm always honored when indie comic book creators reach out to me for interviews. So please welcome to the show, Michael Pickard. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Hey, thanks, Aaron. I appreciate you having me on and giving me the opportunity to talk about the book.
Yeah, I just want to thank you once again for reaching out to me. That was awesome of you to do.
Yeah, of course, man. Kind of like we touched upon before, you spotlight creators, and that's always an awesome thing in this community. That shared platforming of like, oh, check out this guy, he's fantastic. Oh, you should support this book, it's great. It's such a tight community, and just to be able to do this with you is awesome.
Yeah, this is my first time meeting you sort of virtually. I guess usually we'd be meeting at comic book conventions. I don't know when those will be coming back, but since this is my first time meeting you, and I'm sure this might be some of my audience members' first time learning about you, could you tell us a little bit about yourself? Maybe talk about maybe where you grew up and maybe some of the projects you've worked on in the past?
Yeah, absolutely. So for anybody listening, my name is Michael Pickard, and I am an illustrator and graphic designer, but primarily I'm a comic book creator. And I'm from outside of Philadelphia area, not in the city. I would never say I'm from Philadelphia, but just generally speaking, for anybody who wants to try to locate me out in the world. But if you want to find me at the Wizard conventions, I'm typically there. But anyways, I am an illustrator. I have a degree in graphic design and illustration that I received from Kutztown University. And this parlays into my whole comics experience because I went to school to study illustration. And through that program, I learned and developed all of my skill sets in narrative and sequential storytelling, figure drawing, my ability to render physical objects in the 2D space. But I graduated in the spring of 2019, and immediately out of school, of course, in this climate, I needed a job. And having a split degree in graphic design and illustration, I started working at a toy company, designing packaging. And it was, of course, at first a dream job for any nerd to be working with toys, right? But as the job went on, I realized that I wasn't able to creatively express myself in the way that I truly wanted to. And so then I turned to the internet, as one does, to find collaborators to make comics with. I have an interest in writing, but as green-skinned as I am, I didn't want my first works to be self-written because of the potential of the story structure not being fully there, as opposed to working with someone who's well-versed in writing. And so I turned to Reddit, where there's a subreddit called r/comics collabs, where any creator can post and try to find people to work with to create comics. And through that space, I met Doug Wood, who is also an aspiring comics creator. He's had several published writing works. And this is back in January, and I left him on red. I didn't reply to him at all. I just totally forgot to. I'm not on Reddit often, and so he had a message that just gathered dust in my inbox for months. But luckily, I had followed him on Instagram prior to that happening. And to flash forward from January and then to the summer of this year, 2020, Doug started posting saying, hey, I'm looking for an artist to illustrate this crime prison graphic novel. Anybody who's out there interested, hit me up. So I reached out to Doug, at this point desperate to find anybody to work with who was worth their snuff. And of course, Doug is a fantastic writer. So I was on my hands and knees pleading with him, Doug, give me the script. I need to check it out. Please, consider me. and he sent me the script, and it was fantastic for the issue 1 of UltraMax. And immediately after finishing the read, I started penciling out characters and scribbling out character designs, and sent them his way. And from there, it was history. He was like, "These are fantastic. Let's work on this together." And we've had an awesome collaborating experience. But to sum it up, this is my first ever graphic novel. It's my longest form sequential project I've ever tackled. I've done some short 3 to 5 page projects before, just for myself, not published at all. So in summary, my comics history begins here as I am a fledgling in this new world of crowdfunding comics and self-publishing, and it's been a blast so far. It's been really interesting.
That's incredible. I'm glad that he decided to, I guess, give you the chance after you not responding to him.
Yeah, you and me both. Needless to say, I was very grateful when Doug gave me the time of day and even sent me the script. But he's an awesome guy. If anybody is interested in learning more about Doug, I full-heartedly encourage you to check him out on his social media and Twitter. He's fantastic.
Mm-hmm. And it's always nice meeting a fellow graphic designer. I'm a graphic designer myself.
Oh, hey, absolutely. Yeah. Shared interests and shared viewpoints on the world.
And maybe we can take a step back and maybe talk about your 15-year-old self. What kind of movies, TV shows, comic books had the most impact on you when you were 15?
Wow, that is a great question, Aaron, because I got into comics at 15.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. As a kid, I always grew up thinking I was going to be a comic book artist. And I was working down at the Jersey Shore for the summer. And my brother and cousin, who I spend most of my time with, had already gone back to college. And so I was there by myself, and I was thinking, oh, man, like I should go down to the dollar store where I used to get comics as a kid and actually invest in learning about comics and how they're made and just getting into it as someone with now an income. And so I went down and I picked up The Flash issue 21 of the New 52, which was illustrated by Francis Manipool, who was an incredible artist. And The Flash had always been my favorite character growing up. And so not only was I drawn to it from the character alone, but Francis Manipool's art, for anybody who doesn't know, is absolutely stellar. And it just drew me in. And I went home, back to my shore home. I read that issue. And 20 minutes later, I went back to the dollar store and bought like 5 more comics because I was like, I need to get more of this. And from there, I was hooked. So superheroes, of course, growing up, have always been my primary genre of passion and love. But I'm also a big fan of action movies, The Matrix. Die Hard is, of course, a great movie. I'm trying to think of all, like, I'm a huge cinephile. And so now trying to pinpoint the movies in my teen years that I was a huge fan of. Max Landis's Chronicle was a big hit for me at 15. I thought that was a really great and unique take on the superhero genre. Of course, the Dark Knight series, the MCU. Man, what are some other great movies that I love in high school, particularly? Forrest Gump, of course, is a classic.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, most of my my influences at that point in time were definitely from film and television. Heroes was an all-time favorite of mine. Circling it back to superheroes and whatnot, if that's a recurring theme of my life, it's superheroes.
I had a love-hate relationship with that show.
Oh yeah, don't we all? Yeah, I always encourage people, watch season 1. It's a shame it got canceled after that.
Nice.
Yeah.
Was there an earlier time where comic books sort of like captured your imagination?
Wow, to really throw it back, that same dollar store at the Jersey Shore, in the summers, my brother and I would be given a couple bucks and we would go and we'd grab a comic or two, maybe like once or twice a summer. And so here and there I had a book, like a Hulk here and there, maybe a Spider-Man. But one that I still own to this day, and it's tattered and torn, it's a bit of a notorious comic, is All-Star Batman and Robin #1 by Jim Lee and Frank Miller. And that has lasted in my collection since I was, I think, 10. Mm-hmm. That was 2006, I believe, when that came out.
Yeah.
So that one for sure has been like a lasting treasure in my life. I'm a huge fan of Jim Lee, and of course Frank Miller is incredible. As much as that book may not hold up for a lot of people, I know that for me, like when I think of Batman, that book is one of the first things I immediately pinpoint down is Frank Miller's writing style and Jim Lee's incredible Batman, which is of course an all-time great for that character. But yeah, All-Star Batman and Robin #1.
Now, did you get to attend a few Comic Cons growing up?
No, never actually. My first Comic Con was actually the convention in Philadelphia. I think maybe 2015, 2016. So at that point, I was already in college, a little bit older. My brother and I went. We didn't have to, of course, be chaperoned by a parent or anything. But that was absolutely like going to Mecca. That was one of those moments in my life of, oh my gosh, I'm surrounded by all these like-minded individuals. All these people are like me. It's my people. I've been found, you know. So that first convention at Wizard Comic-Con in Philadelphia. And sadly, this year I was hoping to have my first convention table. Now that I was going to have some more portfolio work, some sample pages done, I was hoping that this year would have been the first year to present my work to the world and say, hey, everybody, check me out. But of course, things change, plans change. And luckily, thankfully, I know that by the next time a convention is open that I can attend, I'm going to have UltraMax to present to the world. So that's really cool that I'll have my first graphic novel as a point of profiling my work at my first convention.
Mm-hmm. This is exciting. I mean, I love talking to creators, independent creators and independent comic book creators, but to talk to somebody who's on their first project and you know, getting to know the process and, you know, just filling it out and trying to get the experience of that first graphic novel or first comic book. It's incredible to listen to it.
Thanks, man. It's absolutely exciting and nerve-wracking and anxiety-inducing and morally degrading. I'm kidding. It's been a fantastic time. It's been absolutely stellar. Every day I've been waking up and pursuing my dream of telling stories through my art. So I'm so eager. I'm on the edge of my seat to share this with the world. It's a shame that the Kickstarter is going to conclude and then we still have to finish the production of the book because I want to just get it out there to the world as soon as possible. It's so hard not to talk about like the events of issues, even after the first 10 pages of issue 1 through 4. Mm-hmm. I'm just so eager to share it with everybody.
I guess since you're so eager to share it with everybody, why don't we just jump right into it? And maybe you can talk to us about the story and some of the characters. But before we get to that, I know Doug isn't here to talk about it, but do you know why this story sort of came out of the ether, and why did it resonate with him and the both of you?
So I know for a fact that Doug has been working on this plot loosely for the past 8 years. Mm-hmm. This has been a passion project for him that has been stirring in his mind and just kind of fermenting for a very long time. And for him in his career, I think he was like, all right, this is a great opportunity for me to finally put pen to paper and make this happen. And the big influence on the story is actually the episode of Batman the Animated Series in which a nobody is thought to have killed Batman. If you remember that episode.
I think I vaguely remember that.
Yeah, and so in that episode, all of the supervillains, of course, are now after this guy because he killed Batman. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of the events of that episode. And to jump from that point, as that being like the kindling to Doug's imagination, the events and plot of UltraMax revolve around a character named Travis Holden, who is a low-level supervillain henchman. He's worked for various supervillains within his city. He's been in and out of prison before. He's evaded the cops. He's evaded superheroes. He's had to do all of the grunt henchman type stuff you can imagine, working for all the various crazy supervillains. But on one fateful night, Travis is in the wrong place at the wrong time, and he's convicted of murdering one of the world's most famous superheroes, who's the superhero of his city. And rather than sending him to an average, state prison, he's sent to an UltraMax prison, which is specifically built and designed to contain supervillains and supercriminals. But he, of course, is just a henchman. He's got no powers. He's not a mastermind. He's just a down on his luck guy. He's in the wrong place at the wrong time, and now he's in one of the worst places on Earth, one of the worst imaginable situations he could find himself in. And so he cuts a deal with the government to lessen his sentence if he complies with them and gives them information about all the criminals he used to work for. And so now he finds himself being a snitch in a prison with all these supervillains that he formerly worked for. And he has to evade not only letting everybody find out that he had cut a deal with the feds, but also just navigating the hardships of a supervillain prison to begin with. And the story takes a lot of harder edge elements of prison dramas, such as Shawshank Redemption and Oz, for example, that kind of amalgamates into a harder edge prison drama revolving around characters with superpowers and are super criminals.
Now, after reading the script, is there any one thing that attracted you to this project where you said, I got to do this?
Absolutely. Yes. The characters. Doug's writing is, of course, fantastic. But one of the things that really drew me in was the colorful cast within the story. Within the 5 sample pages that we put out on the Kickstarter for everyone to preview and taste test for the book, you don't really see a lot of them, but the next sequence is in a prison courtyard, and you get kind of walked around and introduced to a bunch of the various gangs and cliques that have formed within the prison and all the supervillains and groups that are operating within the facility. And in that scene, you get not only like some references to characters that you're like, oh, I kind of get who that guy is. He's kind of like these other characters I'm familiar with. But there's a great moment where the main character is like, hey, I recognize that guy. Who's that? And the guy who's escorting him around is like, oh, that's that superhero, blah, blah, blah. Not to spoil it for everybody when you read it, you'll understand when you read it who this character is almost an analog of. Mm-hmm. But when you read that and you find out why he's in prison and how he's surviving in prison as a former superhero, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm understanding like the context and the gravity of the situation for this main character. That things are not going to be easy for him if anybody finds out that he's complying with the feds. So that alone, that instance of using character tropes that, of course, we're all familiar with in new and interesting environments and ways that I've never personally read before. There are so many fruitful opportunities for exploration in this. For example, in Doug's script, when I first read it, there's a character who's in a gang, and his nickname is the Dog. And so immediately in my brain, I pictured him as a Killer Croc type bulldog man. And that was the first character I actually drew from the book. When I'd first read the script, I had to just jot it down because I knew that if I forgot about it, it would just float away into the ether, back into the realm of creativity. And so I jotted this bulldog man who's 7 feet tall and 350 pounds, and he's just stacked with muscle, but he's got this huge bulldog head. And I sent that over to Doug immediately. And I was like, Doug, the Villanueva, the dog, has to be a bulldog man. And that's when Doug, I think, kind of saw that I was passionate about what he was trying to parlay into his story. And that's kind of where the collaboration happened. But yeah, absolutely. All the characters are just so fun. And you find out that some of the characters in the prison are actually sent from various government agencies to keep an eye out on Travis. And so there's almost a Departed style twist in which some of the characters don't know that they're also working for the government. Mm. And so there's almost like a spy v spy element to it, where certain characters are unaware that other people are on the same affiliation as them. And that causes tension, of course, because they have conflicting objectives with Travis. And so that leads into some of the dramatic elements of the plot.
Dude, I wish I could read it right now.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm so eager to share this with the world. It's such a fantastic story. And having to keep hush lip about the cliffhanger at the end of issue 1 has been eating me alive. When Doug and I went through our thumbnails, I sent them over for the final pages, and I said, this is what I'm thinking about for this sequence. And he and I both just kind of like had a moment on the phone where we were like, this is it. That's going to grab people. That is going to be a stellar moment in this story. And just having been unable to share that with the world has been truly eating me up inside. So I'm really excited for when the first issue eventually will drop for people who order the digital issues to read that and just come back to me and tell me how much they enjoyed that sequence.
Yeah, why don't you maybe delve into your working relationship with Doug? I mean, how is the sort of process that you guys have going on in terms of him writing the script, you producing the artwork, and the sort of collaboration process that you have?
Working with Doug has been nothing short of harmonious. It's been alarming to some extent how well we've been working together on the project. When we came to the agreement that we'd be working on it together, we both were coming from the standpoint of you're the writer and you are a creative mind, and I don't want to impede on anything you want in the book, and I want to help you flourish on this project. And Doug was coming from it from the standpoint of you're the visual talent. You should go wild. Like you should just express yourself in this book, and I want to help you make this story as visually interesting as you can. And so that mutual respect for each other's process and influence on the book has led towards us constantly going back and forth about like, oh, how great would this be? Oh, I'd love to draw that. Let me pencil that out. Or me spitballing about like, oh, like for example, the dog Villanueva. Oh, like what if he's this bulldog man? Oh, I didn't even think about it that way. He was just a gang member. He's a nobody in the book. He should be, or I wasn't expecting him to be this larger than life character, this bulldog man. And so for Doug and I, it's almost been like two kids at a sleepover, just like spitballing back and forth, like, oh, what if we did this? Oh my gosh, what if we did this? And so that's been the highlight for me of this entire project, not just being able to come to my desk every day and draw this fantastic book, but having somebody who really wants me to flourish and who I want to flourish in their process has been absolutely incredible. So that's been really great. And we send each other back and forth updates about how we're doing, or any hiccups or conflicts we're having with whether it's his script or me illustrating a character or a sequence. And I've been grateful at least for the fact that we're always open to getting on the phone with one another and figuring out the best way to overcome any roadblocks with any creative things we're figuring out. And that was something that I wasn't expecting on this first collaboration I would ever have. And I'm worried that it will paint a bad picture for any future collaborations in case they're not as beautiful as this one has been with Doug.
I guess that's always a potential problem. I mean, I guess it's sort of similar to how we're both graphic designers and you may be working with a client. It's always nice when you have a client that is open to maybe some suggestions that you as a designer may have, because you're the one actually working on the project. So that pitch and catch, having that open dialogue is always helpful. And I think at the end of the day, it produces a much better product.
I could not agree more, especially with that client reference in the regard of you should respect how I am this element of the machine. I'm this part of the machine and you're this part. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be cut off from one another. We should work in harmony. We should work together. This open dialogue, as you said, to let the river flow and let the back and forth come together. It's so crucial to having any successful project in graphic design or comics for that matter.
Right. I mean, it's always helpful when at least the client will give you the opportunity to sort of present another way of thinking. I know from my experience, I always do this for clients that I have a good relationship with. They may come with me with a certain set of parameters, but I'll come back and after reviewing and after trying out what they want, I'll more often than not create another version with changes that I think might be beneficial to the project. And they may not agree with 100% of the time with what I want to do, but at least they're willing to listen. And surprisingly, well, maybe not surprisingly, they do implement some of the changes that I recommend.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a beautiful thing when that happens, because not that it's a matter of like getting your way or anything like that, but you being able to input your your background, your advice, your expertise into a collaboration, and having it be even just even if hesitant at first, accepted or given you the opportunity to try it at the very least is such a cool thing to have happen.
And why don't you tell me about the rest of the creative team?
Absolutely. So when Doug and I were discussing the project, I have some history with coloring my own work, which you can see on my Instagram. A lot of those pieces have been colored by myself. But for UltraMax, I knew that having the responsibilities of one, penciling and inking the book, but then I'm also doing the lettering and the graphic design assembly of the book. I'm establishing the PDFs documents and the print ready files. I knew I wasn't going to have the time or opportunity to color it, especially not in any way that the book was worthy of or deserved. And so we set out and talked to tons of talented colorists of various backgrounds that we knew, hoping that they might be a good fit for the book. And we came across Hinan Lino, who is an absolutely stellar Brazilian colorist. And he and I were talking back and forth, and he agreed to test color some of my sample pages. And what stood out to me about Hinan's work compared to some of the other colorists who had agreed to do the sample test was that when he saw my inks, he completely understood what the physical shapes were underneath. He understood the anatomy, where light would be bouncing off of, and interpreted those structures through his colors in ways that weren't there in the inks necessarily. For example, when you're inking, you may not necessarily draw like the bridge of the nose if light isn't hitting it that way. But Hinan, in coloring my work, knew exactly where it would be and how the light would be reflecting off of it, and was able to incorporate that into his coloring so that it really brought my original line work to life. And so having brought Hinan onto the project, we couldn't be happier. The communication aspect of being like, hey, Hinan, what if we add this kind of a tone to the scene, like more of a reddish or a darker element to it? He's absolutely open to that same collaborative nature of, oh, okay, yeah, let's try that. And then coming back and presenting like, oh, well, I tried to tweak these things and pull these elements out to up the dramatic stakes or the dramatic elements of a sequence. And so working with Hinan has been incredible. And from his body of work alone, anybody can tell that he's somebody who's going places in coloring. Yeah, he's an absolute talent. He's fantastic.
Yeah, the coloring, the tone, it looks great, and your illustrations are incredible as well. We've never had a letterer on the show, so I'm kind of curious to sort of know more about the lettering process and seeing how you're taking on the lettering responsibilities. Is there anything that you can sort of share about your experiences as your experiences lettering this graphic novel?
Well, Aaron, I'm actually so sorry to disappoint you in answering this question because I am a terrible letterer. I have terrible handwriting, and for the sake of the project, I'm actually using a font from the internet that is pretty commonly used within web comics and professional comics for substitution when a letterer can't be used or afforded. And in this case, I'm using a font. So I apologize for not being able to give too much insight into the process of hand lettering, for example, because I know I can't trust myself to do it. If you see in my line work, I have a shaky hand. My line work is everywhere. I'm scratchy. I'm all over the place. And it might work for some lettering opportunities, for example, like a monster speaking or something. But as it stands for the actual bulk of the book, I could not handle actually having to painstakingly, softly put in each letter and stroke and make sure I'm not wobbling all over the place. So I am using a font for it. But to answer your question as best as I can, I'm using Illustrator and this font to establish my word bubbles and place in the text and edit it as needed to fit within a structure of the book so that all of the lettering is consistent in terms of we have a size and font and leading and spacing that we're using for all main text, as long as it's not conflicting with any borders or whatnot, we'll use a certain size and leading and whatnot for like hollering or screaming. And I'm approaching it in a very structural standpoint. This is kind of my graphic designer element coming in, thinking about if you're designing a packaging or a poster, for example. One, you want hierarchy, but you also want consistency. You don't want to use 10 different fonts that all conflict with one another. And so for me, I kind of laid out a grid structure of how each different type of word bubble would be used. And I'll break from it occasionally for dramatic purpose. Like if a character's text needs to like lead off the page or something, I'll deviate from how that lettering is done. But for the most part, I'm approaching it as there's a continuity that needs to be withheld in the word bubbling. And I'm approaching it as if I'm designing a consistent series of posters, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, lettering is definitely a discipline that not everybody's blessed with.
Yes, absolutely.
You mentioned, consistency, and you also mentioned another word called, I think it was hierarchy. I understand when you say hierarchy as a graphic design term, but for the audience, how would you describe hierarchy?
So for anybody who's unfamiliar with that term in an art space, hierarchy is the way that your brain conceptualizes importance on a page or an image. And so, for example, if I were drawing a picture of a man and he was going to punch you, he's coming at the camera, fist held up in the air, you're going to want to bring emphasis and focal narrative to that fist. And so when you talk about hierarchy, you have to think about how the elements in your composition lead the eye to the important factors. So if it's a poster, you might use a big, bold font for the important text. If it's an advertising for a restaurant, you might use the name in a huge, bold font to grab people's attention and go, oh, this is that diner. And then in the smaller text, which is the secondary information, you'll use that smaller font size or point size so that that's not the first thing that people are drawn to. Because if somebody's walking by a poster and the first thing they see is chicken wings with $1.99, like I don't know what this is. But when they see in big bolding, oh, Mike's Diner, they walk by that and they go, oh, I love Mike's Diner. And then they might get trapped in and go, oh, let me see what they're offering. What is this promotional thing that Mike's Diner is doing? And so in regards to hierarchy, it's all about utilizing the visual elements of design to lead the viewer's eye to the important elements of a page, and then throughout the rest of it.
Right. And I think a good example of this is actually the cover of UltraMax. I think it was the cover is well designed.
Thank you.
I think it's really strong, and it touches all the points that you talked about. I mean, UltraMax is big and bold on top, and then you sort of have that Z flow of information going toward the credits at the bottom. So, and everything has a nice, breakup of space. There's nice what you call white space around all the elements. And if I were to see this cover in front of a bunch of other comic books, I would easily gravitate toward this one over the other ones, because I know that a lot of covers can get overly designed.
Absolutely, especially with covers in mainstream comics, there tends to be an element of what's the eye-catching dramatic stake we could put the character in, whether it's the Flash getting punched by Reverse Flash. Like, what's that eye-catching thing that's going to happen in the book to sell the reader on what's happening in the story? But with UltraMax, how I'm approaching all of the covers is kind of in that graphic design mindset of, okay, let's make, firstly, a graphically interesting poster, and secondly, one that narratively allows you to see what's important in the text or in the image and follow it through all the various elements to get to where you have to end. So like you said, you start with the big, bold UltraMax at the top of the cover. It's a font I actually designed for the book.
Mm-hmm.
It's a self-created logo for the book. And from there, you're directly led into Travis's face. So Travis is the main character, and his silhouette is encompassing all of the various elements of the book. So you have various characters like the Warden. You have Villanueva, the dog, as a character right there over Travis's right arm, which even though he's not necessarily the biggest plot element. He's important in this first issue. So of course that was something we wanted to incorporate. And how it leads you down into that shape, you're going down to his elbows and then back into his handcuffed hands, leads you to the bottom of the page where, like you said, you find our credits. You get my name, Doug's name, and Hinan's name. And so for me, approaching these as a poster as opposed to a eye-catching, here are the events of the comic style illustration was really important to me.
Now I'm curious, looking at the cover, did you create the main character and the silhouette and all the people in there as one piece, or are they separate and you combine everything in Photoshop?
So, well, firstly, just to highlight somebody else who's important in this whole cover process, the watercoloring was done by an artist named Jack Foster. So before anybody looks at the cover and assumes that I painted the watercoloring, that was an artist who's helping me with all of the covers in that regard. And so shout out to Jack Foster for his incredible color work. But actually the ink drawing with all of the character elements, the almost like flame-like texture that's in the background, that's all actually one ink drawing. No photoshopping. Okay. I tend to work almost entirely traditional. If I have to do anything in Photoshop to correct maybe like an ink thumbprint that I left on the page, or like a drop of ink that landed that maybe the whiteout couldn't get out all the way, that's the only time I'll really use Photoshop to make any actual art changes. But for the most part, everything, and in regards to this cover, is one ink drawing.
Cool. Were there any challenges that you'd like to maybe highlight during the process of, I guess, while you're creating the comic book from your standpoint?
From creating the comic book? Well, for myself, I have some experience in terms of self-operation, being your own boss and working on your own schedule. Mm-hmm. The illustration aspect was what I've had my entire life's training towards. And so the actual illustrating of the book has been the part that has come most naturally to me. The most difficult element, and this is to anybody who's self-publishing their own book and doesn't have the restraints of a tight deadline. For example, if you're working at the publisher who is like, we need these pages by X date, and you can't break that, or else you're off the book. I have had the opportunity to schedule out my own workflow, and this has been a unique opportunity for me, who has worked in an office setting where there's a structural hierarchy of I report to so-and-so who reports to the guy above him, and we get the chain of command. And they kind of schedule out, me being the bottom totem of the totem pole, what my responsibilities are. But for UltraMax, the hardest part has been that element of, okay, I need to make sure that all these pages are getting done. How do I set up my schedule and workflow so that I'm meeting my own self-made deadlines and not straying into realms of procrastination or laziness? And one of the things that's benefited that has been the fact that I'm doing various job titles on this project. I've been handling all of the advertising illustrations and laying out all of our banner images that we've been posting on social media. And so whenever I'm stuck on a page, I've had the ability to go, okay, take a break from it, turn over to the computer, do some graphic design work for the advertising. And when you're fed up with that, turn back to the Illustrator and do some lettering. And when that gets old, go back to penciling and inking more pages. So the difficulty has been that schedule element for me, but I've luckily had so many opportunities to get more work done on the book that fortunately I've been able to go, okay, take off the hat of the illustrator. Now I'm the hat of the marketer. And so now I'm doing all the marketing for the book, or, lettering and all the other titles I've been throwing about for the last minute.
Mm-hmm. How has the challenge of maybe balancing working on the comic book and your regular job been?
So actually, to tie it back to my origin story I had presented, it got to a point where when the quarantining and pandemic began, I saw the opportunity while I was working at home that I could feasibly produce a comic book during this time period. I'm not spending money on gas. I'm not necessarily constrained by having to pay for rent or anything at the moment. Living at home as a young recent college grad. Um, I've had the ability to go, okay, I'm not enjoying what I'm doing in my life. I've always wanted to do comics, and I'm sitting at a day job that I can't stand. I have enough saved up. Let's try to pursue this as an opportunity. And so, particularly with UltraMax, I knew that there was a product there that would sell. There was something there. There was a spark of love and creativity from Doug that I knew was going to work. And I had that same feeling towards the book. And I took the leap of faith and left my job during this time period where everything is up in the air, um, to buckle down and make this opportunity happen for me, this dream of working in comics. And Doug, having from the get-go, having planned to crowdfund the book, gave me the opportunity to think about, okay, if we can finance this and do this ourselves, we can then have control over the finances of the book, how much we're allocating towards coloring, production, printing, how many copies we're getting printed, and not having to worry about the various life challenges of having to work a day job and this book. So I've had that luxury, I will call it, that opportunity in my life that while the world was kind of up in the air in chaos, I took this leap of faith on myself and Doug and the passion that we had for the project. So I've been working on this book every day since I've left my job, and I could not be happier. As much as it's been an anxiety-inducing ride at some points in terms of the uncertainties of treading into the darkness with a blindfold on, can be having that neither of us have a huge following and neither of us have self-published or kickstarted a book before. But it's been the opportunity of a lifetime to do this. And I could not be more grateful for this time in my life where I've had the chance to pursue my dreams. Mm-hmm. So that's been mind-bogglingly life-changing.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've talked to a lot of creators, and at the beginning of the pandemic, there was definitely a lot of uncertainty. But as time went on, it became apparent that this was definitely a good time to be productive, and sort of gearing up for when, the pandemic may be over, and say, cross my fingers, 2021. So once things go back to quote unquote normal, all these creators will have projects that they can sell.
Absolutely. That's one of the most beautiful things about, one of the beautiful things to come out of this global tragedy and situation is that fact that creators are going to come out of this flourishing. All this time to ruminate on thoughts and ideas and develop stories and art and paintings and songs. It's going to be an explosion of color and creativity when everything is opened up again and everybody has the opportunity to bring their work to the world. And with crowdfunding comics, I know myself and thousands of other talented creators have had this chance in this time to go, well, comics aren't selling in stores at the moment. Let's try to sell them online. Let's try to transition to this marketplace where people can still support creators that they love and also be part of the actual creation of the book, whether it be through patroning it and funding it, or even getting drawn into it, or even adding to the marketing. I know that I've had a lot of friends and followers who I don't even know help share the book on their own social media platforms. And so it's just a unique time in history where everybody is kind of working together on this project to bring it to life in a beautiful way. It's incredible.
Now, you mentioned crowdfunding, and once again, congratulations on achieving your Kickstarter. What are some pieces of advice that you can give to other first-time Kickstarters out there?
Oh, I actually have some very strong advice in regards to making sure that you have a plan before you even decide to set up your Kickstarter campaign. If you are planning or thinking about putting together a crowdfunded comic book, you should have every element of your campaign pretty much established at the beginning of your run, which sounds like a no-brainer, but ensuring that you have all of these ideas of, okay, what are all of our financial inputs on this book before even getting the 100% crowdfunding. How much do we have to pay to the colorist, for example, to color the sample pages? How much is it going to cost to advertise through Facebook or Instagram or any online platforms? And elements such as, what's our time frame? How long are we going to take to get the first issue out to people? How long are we going to take to get the printed book shipped out to people? How much does the printed book cost to ship? These are all various elements that you might not think about at first. You might just see the opportunity to raise money for a project and be like, okay, we'll just throw a number out there and we'll see what we can pull in. Whereas it should be set up as, for example, with UltraMax, how much does it cost to print 100 copies of the book minimum? And how much does it cost to pay the colorist his share to fund the creation of his side of the book? And from that, we kind of pulled together our crowdfunding goal, plus whatever is added on for Kickstarter's percentage of it. And from there, we kind of went with launching the campaign. So to anybody listening who's never launched a Kickstarter campaign, I highly recommend researching as much as you can how much things are going to actually cost financially, how long things are going to take, how much work you actually have ahead of you with a project. For example, in setting your tier structure in terms of what people can get from donating different amounts of money, whether it's a printed book or a digital book, is absolutely crucial. For example, we were talking about potentially doing a $100 tier where I would do an 8.5 by 11 commission of any character. And we were like, wow, this is a great opportunity. Like, that's a really enticing thing for people to not only get a printed graphic novel, a digital PDF of the graphic novel, but then also an 8.5 by 11 commission for $100. But then when you break it down, if you get too many of those, how much is that going to take away from the actual creation of the book? And so then we dialed it back and went, okay, let's be reasonable about how we're doing these commissions. Let's make it a smaller commission size, limit it to a certain amount of people. And so that way, when the campaign is over and we've hit 100%, I'm not turning around and going, oh no, I have 300 commissions I have to do to get out to people, and not even talk about how much more I have to get done on the book itself. So to anybody listening, if you can just research and ask as many people as you can who are crowdfunding books for advice on how to budget yourself, how much it's going to take, workload wise, I cannot stress it enough. And former guest of yours, Jason Inman, actually was kind enough to answer some of mine and Doug's questions about crowdfunding comics when we were setting to launch ours. And he gave us several great answers about planning and prepping for your campaign that we didn't even think about beforehand. So that's definitely also a piece of advice. Reach out to other people who you know have run successful Kickstarters, because most of the time people in comics are very kind people from my experience, and everyone's happy to help one another. So for example, if anybody wants to reach out to me about running a Kickstarter from an artistic standpoint, please feel free to. I'm happy to help anybody with it, and as much as I can, of course. But
yeah,
the community's there.
Yeah, definitely. I love the indie comic book community, especially Jason and Ashley Victoria Robinson. They're all great people. I'm glad that you reached out to him and you guys were able to connect. Yeah,
it was absolutely incredible that he even responded to me in the first place, because of course people live their lives, they have things going on. He at the time was still running his Kickstarter for Jupiter Jet.
Okay.
And so for him to even take the time of day to respond to somebody who he doesn't know, who's just an up and coming creator, who has no name, no projects behind them, and just be a kind human being and respond and try to help as much as he could, meant the world to myself and my collaborators. So if he catches this, Jason, thank you again. You're the man.
Big ups to you, Jason. I love stories like that, man.
Yeah, that has actually been one of the highlights of this project, is seeing how many people who you reach out to who you might be a fan of, like with me, with Jason, and having them even respond and taking the moment of their time to either respond to any questions you might have, or just to even check out the book. I know that several professional comic book artists who I reached out to replied and were like, hey man, this looks great. Like, your art's fantastic. Like, keep up the good work. And that just means everything, like just that little bit of encouragement. And so The comic book community has been nothing less than welcoming to me at this time, and that has been it's been heartwarming. It's it's really blown my mind how kind and generous everyone has been during all of this.
Yeah, especially in this day and age when there is still a lot of uncertainty. It's nice to see the community sort of pull together.
Absolutely, and everybody wants each other to be successful. I know with my friends who are also up and coming creators, we're always trying to spotlight each other's books and give each other as much promotion as we can, just to help support these other creative and passionate people who we care about. Even if I have no horse in the race, even if I'm not gaining anything financially from it, just the thought that I can promote my friend's project, this thing that I know he's put so much time and love into. It's such an awesome community building aspect that I don't know exists in other creative fields, but in comics specifically, it's been so cool to be a part of that.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a good point. I guess we'll take a quick break and we'll do a thunder round. It's our sort of off the beaten path set of questions.
Okay.
What would you do with $1 million?
Oh, I would start my own independent comic book publisher.
All right.
Absolutely. Support the community.
And do you have a name picked out, or is that too soon?
Oh, well, if I'm riffing off of my podcast that I also host, which is a drink and draw podcast, I would call it IDT Studios, because our podcast is Ink Drink Think.
Okay. Nice.
IDT Studios. There we go.
What about if I gave you $100?
Oh, $100? I would probably buy some art supplies because they are not cheap. I'd get myself some nice nibs, some nice brushes, some fine Bristol board. That'd be a treat, Mike Day.
Nice. I know you're a big Bill Sienkiewicz fan. If Bill was here with us on this podcast, what would you ask him?
I would ask him what realm of reality he's pulling his ideas out of, because Bill Sienkiewicz is he's like a free-flowing explosion. He's like the funnel for this creative mind, of this creative pool of ideas that exists in the ether, and it just channels through Bill Sienkiewicz. He does everything so well. He's a perfect painter, illustrator, storyteller, and he's always experimenting with different styles and techniques. So I'd have to ask him where that comes from, how to try to like siphon some of that creative ability from him, because he's an absolute influence on me and thousands of other people, and it's incredible to see his diversity in his work.
Have you ever met him?
No, and based off my experience of meeting Mike Mignola, I'd probably faint if I ever got the chance to.
Yeah, me too. I haven't had a chance to meet him yet either.
Yeah, I know. Just a sidetrack, when I met Mignola, I totally fangirled out and could barely structure my sentences. I was like, "Mr. Mignola, I'm such a big fan," and he was like, "Oh yeah, man, like, I hope you enjoyed the convention," and like walked away. And like my friend and I were just like giddy in our seats, like, "Oh my god, he talked to us! Oh my god!" So yeah, I'd probably faint if I met Bill Sienkiewicz.
Right. It looks like the main character of UltraMax doesn't have any superpowers. If you existed in UltraMax, what kind of superpowers would you have, or would you be like a non-powered person?
Ooh, in the world of UltraMax, I'd hope that I would be a non-powered individual, just out of the standpoint of I wouldn't want to be sent to the UltraMax prison, unlike Travis in this situation, who's one of the few in the prison who has no powers. But in any comic book world, if I could be a speedster with super speed, I would give up almost anything to have that. That would be incredible.
So are you saying that you'd be a villain in this universe?
Oh, maybe in that universe, but no, I'm a lawful good. I'd absolutely be a hero if I had those abilities. But maybe in the world of UltraMax, I'd be a corrupt version of myself with a goatee.
Your main character was sentenced to 10 years in prison. If you were just released from jail, having completed a 10-year sentence, what's the first thing that you would eat?
Ooh. Tommy Boy's Pizza, Kutztown, Pennsylvania, my college hometown. And there is an absolutely stellar pizza place that's maybe 12 feet by 15 feet. And they have the world's greatest pizza. It's like $3 for a 12-inch slice, and it's phenomenal. Hands down, the greatest pizza I've ever had. So Tommy Boy's Pizza is the first stop for
What
sure.
what makes it so good?
It's one of those things with pizza, like even bad pizza is good pizza, but Tommy Boy's has just perfect ratios of cheese and creaminess, but then like the sauce is salty and sweet, and the bread is never like crunchy, but it's never too soft. It's just always perfectly cooked. It's incredible. And for a 12-inch slice, it holds its shape. It's not like flopping around all over the place. So,
Do you just get it as a regular cheese pizza, or what kind of toppings would you put on it?
I'd have to go classic. Got to go plain.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. I think that's a good mark of a good pizza, if just the basic cheese pizza is just extraordinary.
Yeah, the base is what makes it. Toppings are great, but if it's not a great base, it's not going to be a great pizza.
Exactly. If you could teleport to anywhere in the world right now, well, I guess it might be to Tommy's. Where would you go, and why did you pick that place?
Yeah, after building up my appetite, Tommy Boys. But no, probably Australia. I'm a big fan of nature documentaries and wildlife and animals, and to be able to go to Australia would be a chance of a lifetime. To see all those various creatures and animals that we don't have here in the United States would be really awesome. So definitely Australia.
Yeah, they definitely have animals that we don't have for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd give up the opportunity to see some kangaroos over my daily dose of white-tailed deer. So let me see some kangaroos.
Yeah, when you say Australian animals, I'm quickly reminded of Steve Irwin, and like his children are all grown up now.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I keep seeing things about that online of like various life things that are going on for them. And growing up in the 90s and 2000s, Steve Irwin was a hero. He was an icon to me, especially as a kid who I used to wake up at 6:30 before school as in elementary school, and I would watch this half-hour Animal Planet show that would just focus on a random animal, whether it was an elephant or a rhinoceros, and I would tune in at 6:30 every morning and watch half an hour of just some random animal documentary. So Steve Irwin was absolutely like a Superman in real life to some extent. Like seeing him on TV was like, wow, he's like wrestling an alligator, but he loves it. He's not doing it to be like aggressive. He's trying to teach us about it.
Right.
Yeah, I love Steve Irwin.
Yeah. Sometimes I can't believe he's not with us anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. A tragedy for not just his family, of course, but to anybody who wants to get interested in animals. He was such an advocate for, in the same way that like Jane Goodall, for example, or who is the Planet Earth man who narrates all those documentaries.
Planet Earth.
Man, that is going to absolutely stump me. But just the fact of what he was able to do in terms of bringing awareness towards endangered species and how to care for wildlife and treat it with respect as opposed to, other ideologies of like disregarding it was totally beautiful. So gotta love and give shout outs to the Irwin family as a whole.
Were you thinking of David Attenborough?
David Attenborough, yes,
okay.
Of course. How can you forget David Attenborough? Sir David Attenborough.
That's right. If you were going on a long road trip, what songs would be on your playlist?
Oh, that is a beautiful question. I make playlists for every character I tend to come up with, or at least every book project I come up with.
Yeah, nice. I like that.
For me, an artist who I play on repeat is Jim Croce. He's a folk singer from the 60s and 70s, if anyone's familiar with him. He had one song. The only time I've ever seen any of his songs in pop culture was in Django Unchained. They play one of his songs. And to me, that was like a geek out moment. That was like a Stan Lee cameo for me, because I'm a huge fan of this random folk singer that no one else of my generation knows. And I hear him pop up in a big screen film. I was like, oh my gosh, they know this guy. But Jim Croce, I would play his greatest hits on repeat for a cross-country drive of the United States. He's fantastic.
Interesting choice. What's one thing your fans would be surprised to know about you? I guess you're a Jim Croce fan, right?
Yeah, they'd be surprised because they'd go, I have no idea who that is. But one thing they'd be surprised to know. I don't know. I'm pretty open. There's not much I would say. I would say in an argument, I would argue for pizza over wings any day. So that might be surprising to people who are fans of wings. That's a debate that we often have in my friend group. But no, yeah, there's not really much that anybody who is potentially a fan of me who doesn't know me personally would be really shocked by. If you when you kind of meet me and you're like, oh, you're a comic book nerd, that makes sense because your whole life is kind of oriented around talking about superheroes, and your room is decked out with nerd paraphernalia, and you have bookshelves full of graphic novels. Yeah, I'm a pretty open book in that regard, but maybe if anything, that I'm pretty active. I'm pretty into fitness and running. And I know for a lot of people that could be jarring at first to be like, oh, like you don't look like a stereotypical comic book person. But of course, those stereotypes have kind of gone out the window nowadays. Everybody's kind of into this stuff, and it's not a weird thing for anybody who looks a certain way or is into like metal, for example, could be into crocheting or knitting. That's a very old world kind of thing of like, you can't like this if you like that. But yeah, if anything, I would say the fact that I like to stay fit and stay up to date with like health trends. But nowadays, that's not like an unheard of thing for people to like other things, you know?
Not at all. I mean, especially with, YouTube there, you can just disappear down a YouTube rabbit hole and just, whatever topic that comes up, and you'd like find out all these new things that you never knew about before.
Absolutely. I've spent too many nights going down UFO rabbit holes to negate that thought. YouTube is a pit of despair for me. If I open it, I'm just locked in on like, wow, were the pyramids built by extraterrestrials? Wow. Like I just got locked into it, even if it's the most absurd thing or ridiculous thing. Yeah, UFO rabbit holes.
UFOs and the pyramids, it could still be reality. You just never know. I mean, I don't think anybody's really explained how the pyramids were really built.
Yeah, that's always a fun topic of theoretical history or hypotheticals to explain circumstances or situations, because as far as we know, we can't explain almost everything. Well, of course, that's coming from someone who's not a scientist or a biologist or anything. I know I have friends who are biology majors who are hearing this and going, what the hell are you talking about, Mike? But of course, it's just a fun rabbit hole to go down of like what happened to the Roswell UFO craft, for example. It's like, oh, like it was the Russians. No, the FBI took it. The CIA took it. Or with like the pyramids, like Graham Hancock, who's a theoretical historian, talks about various things of how alternative histories that were not taught could lead into the creation of the Great Pyramids, for example, or other historical civilizations that we don't know about because they could have been more advanced but have been wiped out. Those are rabbit holes I could get sucked into for another 3 hours if need be.
Right. I mean, I think I was watching this one video, or maybe I was talking about it with some friends, and the topic came about of like the universe. Like, I think I may have said, I wonder how many universes there's been in our history, because like you got the Big Bang, and there's some talk about how there's probably like some sort of big contraction, and then another Big Bang happens. So I wonder how many of those have happened in the past.
Oh, absolutely. And then from a creative standpoint, I'm sure you start going down the same things of like, well, what was that universe like? And then you get into nerdy things of like Galactus was from a previous existence.
There you go, right.
And yeah, there's a comic by an Italian, I believe, comic creator, Vatsilis Godzilis, whose name I just absolutely butchered. He's incredible. He's very similar to Bill Sienkiewicz in his inking style. It's very sporadic and all over the place, but it's very uniquely his own. But he has a great comic called The Bigger Bang, and it's about a superhero who is the last surviving human of our existence after a cataclysmic reality-destroying event occurs. And so now he's like the last human, and he's essentially Superman, and he exists in this new reality where he just wanders through space and is feared by this whole new reality that doesn't know how to accept this godlike being. Great comic.
Well, I'll have to look that one up.
Yeah, it's very fun. It's I think 4 issues for the original volume, but yeah, it's a really fun read.
Did you pick it up at a shop, or did you read about it on Comixology?
That was actually one of my early shop buys.
Oh,
so
okay.
Yeah, after I started getting into comics, I live within 20 minutes of the King of Prussia Mall, which is the second biggest mall in America, if anybody is familiar with it. And It's actually a huge destination spot for people in this area who are touring or tourists of Philly and whatnot. They go to the King of Prussia Mall. I think at one point was America's biggest mall before the
Mall of
Mall of
America.
America.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that has a comic book shop in there, and so for me that was my local comic book shop, even though it was half an hour out of the way. I would go there and buy books in high school, and Bigger Bang was one of those first indie books that I picked up that I was like, this is crazy. I've never seen anything like this. And so I just had to buy all of it.
Nice. That looks like a fun read. And I guess my last question of the fun round is, what color would your lightsaber be?
Ooh, yellow.
Yellow. Interesting. Why would you pick yellow?
Yellow is one of my favorite colors, but I remember in The Force Unleashed, which was an old Star Wars video game, that you had the opportunity at one point in the game to customize your lightsaber. And that was for me the first time being like, wait, there are orange lightsabers? There are yellow lightsabers? Like, I never really realized you could do any color. I just thought it was red, blue, and green, and purple for Mace Windu. But then in that game, you could have a yellow lightsaber, and that to me was like the coolest thing because it was like, it was a warm color, so it was kind of like the Sith in red, but it wasn't outright aggressive like red can be. It was yellow. And growing up, I didn't like orange, so for me that was the one. I was like, yellow lightsaber, ride or die.
Yeah, it must be boring to be a Sith. I mean, you're stuck with red.
Yeah, I mean, you can't even get shades of it. There's no burgundy. You can't get a pink.
Right. Yeah, I guess I want to shift the conversation back, I guess, to you. What are some of your maybe non-comic influences in terms of illustration and art?
Ooh, that's a fantastic question. Growing up, I had the pleasure of living close to the Brandywine River Museum, which is a museum that particularly houses the work of a local family of artists who in the illustration world are very famous. So you might be familiar with it through graphic design and whatnot. But N.C. Wyeth, who was an illustrator and painter from the 1930s, he illustrated a lot of classic books like Treasure Island. I almost said Treasure Planet, which is the Disney adaptation.
Right.
But Treasure Island, Robin Hood, Last of the Mohicans, and he's this beautiful painter, this beautiful impressionistic painter. And growing up, he was one of those artists who I like immediately connected with because his work was so exciting and very colorful, like the superheroes I was watching in cartoons on TV. And so N.C. Wyeth as a kid was this like art hero to me. I was like, I gotta be like that. But then as I got older, I started to transition more into appreciating his son, Andrew, who compared to his father is like the exact visual opposite. If you look at NC's work, his work is very colorful, almost optimistic. If you want to put superheroes in the mix, NC Wyeth's outlook on life seemed very much like Superman. Everything was bright and colorful. Whereas his son Andrew, his work is very dour and gray, but has beautiful composition and focuses more on elements of shape and layout and color as opposed to perfectly rendering an image. And so his art has a very gray, flat quality to it, but it's like so real you can touch it. He has this dark atmosphere to everything that he painted and illustrated. And for me, like as I grew up, that definitely influenced a lot of my artistic decisions moving forward from getting into him. Going into like Bill Sienkiewicz, for example, who when you see him ink a drawing, for example, when he inks Dennis Cohen's work, it's very scratchy. It's very aggressive with the ink and the way that the pen is scratching the board. And I'm so drawn to that. And so trying to pick up on how he was doing that and picking up influences of like mood and atmosphere from the Wyeth family, who I was influenced on from an early age, really like transitioned into my artwork heavily as I've gone through art school.
Now, you're producing a comic book, which is also known as sequential art. Working on a comic book and say maybe some of the other fine art projects that you've worked on in the past. I mean, how much of an adjustment was that? I know you've grown up a comic book fan, but actually doing it, is there anything that any insight that you can sort of lend to that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. With regards to illustration, you tend to think of it as, from an outsider perspective at least, when you think about illustrating, you're like, oh, he can draw a scene, he can draw something, he could draw people on the beach, he could draw people in a room, he could draw people at a cafe. But when you think about comics as a variation on illustration, and as you pointed out, sequential art, you realize that not every element of the visual landscape is important to the storytelling of a scene. And in approaching this comic, one of the things that I keep having to remind myself in drawing is not to get too bogged down with the details of the background, for example, because it doesn't really add anything to the story. If you think about like movies that you've seen, you might think of like your favorite scenes and you might remember what the wall coloring was. But for the most part, like you'll have kind of like the Bernstein Bear effect where you remember it one way, but in reality it was something totally different. And so with illustrating this comic, I've had to think and evaluate what visual elements I can leave out of an image for it still to translate as what's happening. So certain panels don't have a background because they're not needed, because if I were to draw it, it would just get covered up by the word balloon anyway.
Right.
And in reality, the cells that the character are walking by are unconsequential to the moment that he's in. It's him, it's the emotion that he's feeling, it's what he's conveying. And so as a comic book illustrator now, it's more about what thematically is important as opposed to what is structurally important, like for a visual image.
Yeah, that's an awesome point. I'm reminded of my friend Keith Jones. He's the owner of Kid Comics, and he was doing one of his live videos, and he was explaining that, he was drawing a tunnel, and there was a lot of bricks on that tunnel, and he was explaining how like he didn't have to draw all the bricks of that tunnel. He just had to draw enough for the end user to make the connection that, hey, there's bricks in this tunnel. And then because he went on to further explain that having more bricks in there wouldn't, like you said, wouldn't really be helpful to the story at all. It would in fact just be too much. It could potentially just be too much stimulation, and you wouldn't see the important elements of that panel.
Yeah, it's the trickery that that the artist gets to parlay into their work. I don't have to draw everything. As long as you think it looks right, it's right.
Right.
It doesn't have to be right. I could draw the most disfigured, whacked out hand you've ever seen. But if it looks like a hand to you, it's a hand. So that's the trick. If you're a visual comic book illustrator, just make it look pretty right. People will accept it as right.
And when you were in school, what kind of school did you go to? Was it a pure art school, or was it a general sort of university?
It was a state school, general university in that regard. I, in choosing schools, was very conflicted because I had the opportunity to go to the Kubert School, not out of acceptance or anything, but in terms of it being close to me, it being affordable. So in my mind, it was an option. But in truth, I wouldn't have had the experiences I've had that have shaped me into a creator if I had gone down that route and gone directly through the Kubert School. Having gone to the program I went to, which was, like I said, graphic design and illustration, I got the experience firsthand of, one, working in graphic design professionally, but also from that mindset, that school of thought. I've applied so many graphic design elements to the way I draw now, as opposed to if I had gone to the Kubert School, for example, I would just be drawing comics, how comics are done. Whereas now I have this background of how would a graphic designer draw that cover? How would a graphic designer lay out that page and make the page flow correctly, as opposed to traditional schools of sequential art. But also one of my illustration professors left me with like the greatest piece of wisdom I think I've ever received, which was when I was interning at Crayola, of all places. And a lot of the people who were employed there were formerly in my same program, hoping to illustrate professionally. And what my professor told me, she, as a mentor to me, sat me down and was like, Mike, don't get comfortable. And to me, I think that has stuck in the back of my mind of every facet of my life. Don't get comfortable with how you're illustrating, because if you get stale, you'll never break that staleness. You got to keep trying to change it. You got to keep trying new things, reinvent yourself, practice new ways, experiment with inking other people's art, experiment with what mediums you're using. The first sample pages I sent out to companies, looking back, it probably wasn't the brightest idea because I don't work with this medium often. They were done with charcoal.
Mm-hmm.
And my thought process was, well, I'm experimenting with charcoal. Like maybe it'll catch somebody's eye. And even though it didn't get me any work and didn't get me anywhere, it progressed my school of personal artistic thought to being like, okay, well, how can I use that medium or those techniques with ink, for example, or how can I use charcoal again for like a brick wall texture instead of having to use ink? So not getting comfortable in any artistic or life facet has really stuck in my brain. And I wouldn't have had that if I had gone to any other college, whether it was a art school or a public school or general school, I should say.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't have met your mentor.
Yeah, exactly.
How bad are you missing actual comic conventions?
Pretty sorely, especially because this was going to be the one where I was actually going to go not as a guest and a fan only, but I was hoping to attend as a networking event. And so I was really looking forward to the opportunity to meet and discuss comics with other like-minded comic creators. Because as much as I have had a lot of friends who are into comics, I've never really had as many close people in my life who want to actually create stories in the same way that I do.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was very sorely missing out on that opportunity to like get nitty gritty about sequential layouts and how to transition pages and different techniques that they might employ that I don't, or what brushes they use versus pens and whatnot. So for me, that was just a heartbreaking thing. But I ended up meeting a bunch of people online, just reaching out on Instagram who I'm a fan of and saying, hey, your work's fantastic. I'm a huge fan. And them reaching out back to me and saying the same thing. And I've kind of formulated my own little group of friends now who are all comic book creators who are aspiring to build and make their own self-published work. So that's been really cool. And as much as it would have been great to meet them in person, I've at least gotten to make acquaintances and friends in this community.
That's good to hear. It's definitely the networking aspect that I really miss at conventions. I mean, not networking as a means of like just, trying to make deals or anything like that, but just making that connection with, say, other content creators, people that I've interviewed in the past. Just hanging out and catching up at an actual event.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, I'd only ever attended as a fan, and so I'd walk around to art tables and the artist galleries or the artist alleys for that matter, and be a huge fan of what people were producing. But I'd never have my own work on me to show and commune with and be like, oh, well, like this is something I was trying and getting feedback and whatnot. So for me, I'm so envious that you, especially with this podcast, have had that ability to like you said, catch up and just hang out with people who just love the same thing you do. Mm-hmm. And so I'm so ready for the next convention cycle to come around and hopefully be open for me to attend and bask in all of the opportunity that it represents, like meeting people, talking comics, right. getting really nerdy and sweaty about everything.
When do you think you'll feel safe enough to attend a convention?
Ooh, that's a great question. Potentially when... I mean, I guess the way to answer that question would be when everything else in the world has settled and gone back to some sense of normalcy, whether we're wearing masks or whether there's a new procedure or something that we do as a society or as a people to, keep everybody healthy and safe. That's when I would probably feel most comfortable attending shows again, because of course the cliche is con flu,
right?
And it's just a cultural. I mean, I should say not even just cultural. It's just a grouping of people in such a tight knit space from so many places that somebody's child bringing home the flu from their preschool then brings it to the convention, who spreads it to 10 people, who go home and spread it to 10 people. Of course, that's like an even greater concern now with what's going on in the world. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's just a matter of when other things begin to become normalized in terms of eating at restaurants and everybody's going back to the office, for example. Those are elements or key signs to me that I'm going to think like, okay, maybe it's safe to go into public forums again.
It seems that you have a good handle on being productive during this pandemic. Do you have any advice for creatives out there who are struggling during this time?
Oh, absolutely. Find a podcast that you really love or a show, especially if you're a creative who can multitask. For example, I can't write when I listen to podcasts, but I can illustrate for sure. And so for me with drawing, I have I have a library of maybe 10 to 20 podcasts that I listen to weekly who, depending on the day or what mood I'm feeling, I can just click on one of their shows for that week and get into my work and not have to think about like external things. I can just be in the work and have other people talking around me. So definitely finding either podcasts or music or bands or shows that you can listen to in the background while you work, if you're a creative and can afford to. Highly recommend. I don't think I could have gotten through it without that false sense of other people being around me. They're having a conversation that I can't be a part of.
Now, what are maybe 3 podcasts that are on your constant rotation?
Ink Pulp Podcast, which is by Sean Crystal. He's an absolutely phenomenal inker and just all around amazing guy. He gives sage advice to creators who are hoping to get work in comics. And he interviews a lot of other creatives, not just in comics, but also in music on his show. And he spotlights a lot of illustrators like Jim Mahfood and Tommy Lee Edwards on his show. So that's a constant watch for me, as well as Comic Pop, which they will comedically review or talk about older graphic novels that have been published before. They'll run through like modern comics. They'll talk about weekly comics that are coming out. They have a show called Pull List, I'm pretty sure, where they weekly will go through like 10 comics that they read and review them and talk about like the things that made them great or the things that could have been handled better and whatnot. So Comic Pop is absolutely one. And finally, I'd probably say the Original Drink and Draw podcast, which is something I've been more recently turned on to. But that's with like Joe Quesada and several other industry professionals who, if you look at the roster that you're working with or what they're hanging out with on that podcast, you're going to be like, oh my God, like these are all people whose work I love. And they just hang out and have a couple drinks and illustrate while they talk about whatever, not even what they're drawing. Sometimes they'll be drawing Mary Jane Watson, but they'll just be talking about, you know, whatever happened on like TV last night or whatever. So that's absolutely one of the more casual podcasts that I listen to, but I could not stress enough if you're into comics not to listen to it.
Nice. As a graphic designer and podcast host, I know the value of collaboration and receiving help from my peers, even though, you know, sometimes I'm reluctant, and I'm sure a lot of you are, to ask for it. Who are some of the people that have helped you along your journey? Who do you want to give a superhero shout out to?
Oh, absolutely. I'm going to shout out my very good friends who are my fellow podcast co-hosts on the show that I talked about briefly, which is Ink Drink Think, who are Johnny Wise, Nate Wells, and Todd Blackwood. The 3 of them have not only given me extremely sound advice about what I'm doing or like different artists who I should be referencing in terms of like, oh, hey, you're kind of doing this thing with your hands and that you're inking. You should check out this artist. They draw hands in a very similar way. See what you can learn from what they're doing and how they're implementing their style. And they've also just given me incredible feedback and lessons about forgiving myself when I mess up a piece. I know that we were recently drawing together, and right. I totally botched a flash drawing in the show that we were doing, and it totally soured my mood. And I was sitting there like, oh my God, I can't believe I ruined this drawing. And I was so frustrated with myself. But Todd, who is the most seasoned of all of us, he has had the most experience within comics. He kind of sat me down and was saying things like, well, hey man, you gotta look at it as like a learning experience. Like, you know how to attack this from the next approach. Like, you know what you're going to do next time to make this better. And just having a like-minded community of people who are there to not just hang out with me, but also want to helped me grow as an illustrator and me back with them is amazing. So those three in particular, and of course, some other talented, lovely people I have in my life. My partner, Alyssa, is also a graphic designer. And so she'll honestly constantly help me with pointing out things in my work that I might not have noticed before. Like if something looks a little weird, she's always there to help me find that and correct that as needed. But she's always also there to help me like figure out layouts and whatnot from her graphic design standpoint. And she's, of course, phenomenal as her own illustrator and artist. So she's absolutely another spotlight I need to give.
Nice. So it's good to have that group of people that you're comfortable receiving, some sort of feedback from, even, the good and bad.
Yeah, as much as the bad is hard to swallow sometimes.
Right.
It's good to hear. It's better to have people who are going to be honest with you. And then rather than you publish UltraMax as a comic and then go, yeah, Mike, when you showed me page 3, I really hated that one guy's face. You should have changed that one. Like, well, why didn't you tell me when I showed you 5 months ago?
Right.
So yeah, it's really great to have people who are honest with you and happy to help you grow and want to see you grow and not put you down or lie to you about seeing a flaw in your work. So that's indelibly helpful. Like just being able to have people who are going to honestly critique your work.
Right. I guess we'll start closing out the show. Michael, it's been an honor having you on the podcast, and I hope to one day meet you in person.
Aaron, that would be absolutely fantastic. Hopefully I can get out to some of the shows you go to, assuming like San Diego Comic-Con, because I would absolutely love to catch up with you in person after this conversation.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything else that you'd like our audience to know about UltraMax that we missed?
No, I know that the campaign is ending on October 15th, 2020. So other than that, please go out and support the book. It's a love letter to prison dramas and superheroes and crime fiction. And it's an incredible work from Doug and Hinan, excluding myself. It's incredible. And I cannot, just on their work alone, promote this book enough. If I wasn't even attached to this book, I'd be hyping it up because it's that fantastic.
Awesome. I know you're putting all your effort into UltraMax right now, but are there any other upcoming projects that you'd like to mention?
No, not publicly. I definitely have some ideas for what I want to do after this project. Some books I'd like to write myself and potentially crowdfund as well, which I'm happy to talk to you about off air. But I just planted those seeds. They're not even sprouting yet, so I don't even know if they'll go anywhere. And so for me to come out here, I would never just spotlight a book that that would never come out,
Of course. Well, yeah, whenever those are ready to unveil, I would love to hear about them.
I'd love to, man. That would be fantastic.
Where can people find you online?
Anybody can find me on Instagram. I'm at Michael Pickard Art. I know there are other Michael Pickards out there who are artists, but I'm the one with the red face and the yellow background. You can find my work there. You can also catch me on Ink Drink Think, which is a podcast on YouTube where myself and 3 other talented artists get together, have a couple drinks, and draw and have a conversation based around a single topic of pop culture.
Cool. Well, we'll definitely put links to your podcast on the blog post.
Thanks, Aaron. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem, man. Like I said, it was a pleasure getting to know you, and I definitely hope we get a chance to meet up in person and, as the young kids put it, IRL.
Younger than me, then.
Cool. Well, have a good rest of your weekend, and I look forward to talking to you soon.
Thanks, Aaron. You too, man. Take it easy.
Cool. Thank you so much for tuning into the Holiday Show podcast, where we love showcasing independent comic book creators like Michael Pickard. Please check out the UltraMax Kickstarter campaign, which ends on October 15th, 2020. If you believe in our mission to be the voice of independent pop culture creators, we would love a rating, hopefully 5 stars, and a comment on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also find us on Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, or our website, hallh.com. Also, please remember that representation matters, and please share our episodes using the hashtag HallHShow.